handout for you to look out. You'll have a couple more today. Hopefully we get to them. But this is when we had the hearing on the child care tax credit. I just asked research to put together all of the things that we're doing that is already in statute that impacts child care. So you can take a look at that. Thank you, Amelia.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. House Bill number 2096 would amend the transferability provision of the Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit. The bill would amend KSA 7932-313 to provide that Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credits will be transferable from the year the tax credit was originally issued. The bill provides that instead of the transfer qualifying beginning in the year the credit is transferred, the credit would be allowed to be transferred beginning in the year the cash investment was originally made by the qualified investor. Lastly, the bill also provides in a new subsection G that these changes contained in the bill would apply retroactively to credits issued for tax year 2022 and years thereafter. The bill passed the House on February 26th of 2025 on a vote of 111 to 6. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Questions? Thank you. Our first conferee is Riley Gain. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Riley Goen, and I am here on behalf of Friends of Historic Preservation. Historic preservation and housing kind of go hand in hand. There's lots of lovely buildings around the state that are ripe for housing redevelopment. And so we are here because Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit is one of those programs that helps make those projects possible. This program is exclusively used to develop housing in rural communities in counties less than 75,000 population. And it was created in 2022 unanimously by the legislature. In 2024, last year, one of our members approached us and said that there was an issue with the transferability of the program of the tax credits. And so that way, if they're transferred a year after the cash investment was made, they would lose a year of the carry forward and thus make the tax credit less valuable for purchasers. So this bill is just a simple technical change to the program. There was no fiscal note attached to the bill, and it would allow buyers to receive the full 5 years of carry forward, and that incentivizes rural housing and makes more cash available to the developers who use this for their rural housing developments. And I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Seeing none. So thank you, Riley.
Okay, thank you.
Alex Orrell, welcome.
Good morning, committee. Alex Orrell, Senior Vice President, Government Relations for the Kansas Bankers Association, here to present proponent testimony in HB 2096. I do want to thank the previous conferee for bringing this issue to our attention, as well as Commerce Bank. When this bill was originally drafted, the legislative intent was to set it up like the historic tax credit. And so that transferability portion piece that we're fixing today truly is a technical fix. This would allow the full value, or as much value as they could possibly get out of the credit, because right now, because of losing that 1 year, they're not getting the full 90 cents or 90 plus cents on the dollar, so less cash in the developer's hands. On the program itself, a lot of talk about housing in this in the Capitol this year. I will state on this one, I do believe this program does have proper parameters and guardrails and caps. It's truly intended for rural Kansas communities under 75,000, and there's guaranteed pots or guaranteed silos for even the most rural of our populations. We have actually in Kansas, 58 of our counties are below 8,000. 24 of them are below 25,000. So a significant part of our state is definitely being benefited from this, and I do believe it has been successful based on some of the KHRC data that came out, and that because of this program, we've built more than 1,000 new homes in Kansas rural Kansas communities. As we continue to see outmigration and we continue to see urbanization of our state, I think it's critically imperative to make sure we're doing what we can in the rural Kansas communities. If we lose that rural voter base, I've been talking to my ag bankers and even my ag friends for many years on this issue. If we continue the trend we're seeing, we're going to continue to lose Senate seats in the rural areas. We'll continue to use House seats in the rural areas, and that voice of rural Kansas will be less in the building. And so everything we can do to help the rural Kansas communities, I think we need to look at. I know tax credits and incentives, yeah, they cut both ways, and people don't like them, and I fully understand that. But at the same time, sustaining some of our rural Kansas communities and doing what we can to help them, and other types of cuts, income tax cuts, et cetera, you need more than just that to help our rural Kansas communities, in my opinion. So I do hope when the committee takes this up, it truly looks at this as maybe not the bigger conversation of some of the other housing proposals in the state or in the capital this year, that they look at this for what it is, and it's a technical fix to a program that we think actually has been pretty successful. So appreciate the committee's time, and we'll stand for questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alex. Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Justin Pregnant? I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. I apologize.
That's all right.
Welcome.
That's all right. Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Justin Prejeant. I live in Atchison. I own and operate a company called Pomeroy Development. We specialize in doing adaptive reuse and historic preservation work in rural Kansas downtown districts. And so that includes if there's a vacant YMCA boarding house building that was built in 1913, we come into the scene, acquire that building, and oftentimes renovate it into housing. We've done one old YMCA boarding house, a couple of vacant schools, and currently I'm involved in two projects in downtown Great Bend and in downtown Hutchinson that would take long vacant downtown hotel buildings and convert those into much needed housing in rural Kansas. This is a very specific and technical fix. And so the larger question as to whether tax credits ought to exist or whether the KHITC program ought to exist, I think reasonable people could disagree about that, and so I'll set that aside. What I would hope everyone could agree upon is that if this program is going to exist, we ought to make those credits as valuable as they can be so that their utility is maximized and that their usefulness in terms of creating housing in rural Kansas is maximized. And so what I've seen as a user of the program several times over is that the single largest purchaser of these credits has decided to exit that marketplace entirely. That has seriously impacted pricing, has negatively impacted the overall marketplace for how these credits are sold and monetized in the process. And so I want to thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to that today, and would certainly answer any questions that you might have before I return to my seat. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Schallenberger.
Thank you. So who was it Commerce Bank the largest? Okay, thank you.
So I guess you opened a can of worms on the tax credits. I understand that individuals and businesses want the tax credits, but why should we allow transferability of those tax credits? Because you're not using them, you're selling them to help your business.
Correct. I don't have enough income tax liability to be able to utilize those credits. It would take me and some of these projects a decade to be able to utilize those credits. And so the credit doesn't have much usefulness unless it's transferable or saleable.
You made my point. Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Okay. Senator Klemp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. More of a curiosity question. So the benefit of the credits that they're sellable or transferable, I don't have an opinion yet, but does that provide the ability to get gap financing you wouldn't historically be able to get?
Yes.
Because the banks aren't going to provide that gap financing, or why is that?
Because rent in rural Kansas is not at such a level to be able to pay for the construction cost. There's just a disconnect between what it costs to build something and what you can garner in rent in a rural Kansas market.
Not teeing up softballs or something. Would you not be able to build would there be less building as a result of that?
Yeah, none of the projects that I built would be possible.
I think it's that. All right, that's a good comment. Thank you.
I think that's a bold statement, none of them, but it does impact it. It's an interesting topic. I think we need a deeper dive on transferable tax credits. This probably isn't the bill to do it, but any other questions for the conferee? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have proponent written testimony We have no opponent, no neutral. Is there anybody that would like to testify as a proponent? Any opponents? Any neutral? I'll close the hearing on House Bill 2096 and open the hearing on 2893, or 2083. Sorry, guys, 2083. Thanks, Amelia. It's one of those mornings.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, House Bill number 2083, as amended by House Committee, would provide a property tax exemption for new energy storage systems and exclude new energy storage systems from the commercial and industrial machinery and equipment exemption. Section 2 of the bill would amend KSA 79266, if you would recall, is a fairly new statute, to provide a 10-year property tax exemption for any new energy storage system on and after January 1 of 2025. A new energy storage system is defined in subsection C5 as an energy storage system that the commencement of construction or installation of such property began on or after January 1 of 2025, but does not include an energy storage system that received any necessary county approval prior to January 1st. There's also a definition of energy storage system in the bill, which you can find in subsection C4, which generally provides that it means a commercial or utility scale electrochemical, mechanical, electrostatic, or gravitational devices that charge or collect energy. And you can read the rest of the definition there. The definition does include electrical from a generation facility as part of the definition does include any existing or new electric generation facilities or any electric generation facilities that utilize renewable energies. The section 1 of the bill would amend the commercial, industrial, machinery, and equipment exemption in 79223 to exclude these new energy storage systems as defined in section 2 on and after January 1 of 2025. This exclusion, though, again, would not include those energy storage systems that had their county approval prior to January 1st of 2025. The bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book, and the bill did pass the House on February 19th of 2025 on a vote of 90 to 29. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Senator Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amelia, I just want to make sure I know the 10-year property tax exemption that we're talking about is only the state property taxes levied, or is this all county property taxes levied as well?
This is a property tax exemption, which applies to all of the property taxes, so state and local.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Amelia. Our first conferee is Randy Stuckey.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing us to testify this morning. Again, Randy Stuckey on behalf of Renew Kansas, Biofuels, and Kansas Grain and Feed Association, the grain elevators of the state of Kansas. So speaking to you this morning about industrial users of energy, high users of energy, and they're looking at this potential technology. We were not, I don't believe, the intended market of this bill. I think it was initially intended to focus on utility users of the same technology, large batteries, essentially, ESS, the energy storage systems. But we are included then in this bill. And let me set the table a little bit for you about, very quickly, today, without this bill, we're not aware of anyone who has actually purchased these capital-intensive systems today, but they are looking at them for various reasons. So without the bill, if they were to purchase an energy storage system, essentially machinery and equipment, they would argue to first the county appraiser and then the Board of Tax Appeals and eventually beyond that, if necessary, that this is machinery and equipment under 79223 as part of the state policy to encourage the purchase of this type of equipment and grow your business that it would qualify for a permanent exemption, permanent property tax exemption. That's the law today without this bill. We understand the purpose and the intent of this bill by the utilities to shift from this permanent tax exemption to a 10-year property tax exemption. Moving into the bill itself then, we have talked to both our practitioners and to the Department of Revenue, who have said that, advised us that if we would seek to retain that permanent exemption, as is in the law today, that we would need to specifically say that in 79223 for industrial scale, not utility, but industrial scale machinery and equipment. So that's one potentiality here for the committee to consider, that this is machinery and equipment, should qualify for the existing property tax exemption for other machinery and equipment, but that would need to be an amendment to the bill. Without any kind of an amendment, the argument would still be out there that we would qualify for this, but we would likely have to make that argument before the Board of Tax Appeals at some point. So I think this would invite litigation for the industrial community, not just my industries, but any industry that would seek to purchase this capital-intensive equipment going forward. If we wanted to, if it was the committee's or the legislature's intention to not allow the permanent property tax exemption for this specific type of machinery and equipment, we're saying this type of machinery and equipment is to be treated differently, we're going to pivot to a 10-year, right? Then we look at what the 10-year provides today in this bill. The problem with the current language is that the tech folks in the field today that have pitched their potential ESS equipment for an industrial scale, not larger utilities, but for the industrial size, is a thermal sink, not electricity, but you use the electricity either co-generated or you pull it off the grid to superheat carbon bricks, and it's a really old technology, but it's still useful today. That specific type of technology is not in the bill language right now. You'd have to actually write that in, so that would have to be a separate amendment or a different amendment. I give you all this just to give you what the bill does and how it might affect our industries. I was told this morning at 6:30 on a phone call that worst case scenario this out, ask for the 10-year. What we don't know is how this actually pencils out. These are large investments. Doesn't make sense to invest all that money into something that may not pencil out if all you're doing is reducing that peak rate, right? Because that's the point of this, and for one aspect is to remove that peak rate because you store the energy, you pull it off your battery essentially. And those peak rates are very high. So if you can avoid that, maybe that pencils out. But in 10 years, I don't know if you know that. The other idea is that for our industry, for the ethanol industry, you lower the carbon intensity score. If you can capture that low carbon energy, renewable energy, you store it, then use that energy to lower the carbon intensity score of your ethanol fuel. That allows you then to market into the West Coast market that requires that lower carbon intensity. Just kind of a unique piece on our specific industry, why we might utilize the technology. It's inviting, but the dollars have to make sense. So I just invite you to look at that issue, and we're willing to work with and have been working with the proponents of the bill on whatever amendment the committee might think is appropriate. So certainly would stand for any questions. I know that was a lot to take in, but it's there's other complications to the bill that we wanted to make sure you were aware of. So thank you.
Committee, any questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You're the first up, Mr. Stuckey, so you get the question. So this would not be up to local units of government. Most tax abatements, or many tax abatements, are up to local county commissions, but this would not. This would be a statewide exemption to property taxes, correct?
Right, so under 79223 in 2006, the legislature passed and exempted all commercial and industrial machinery and equipment from personal property taxation. And that was to encourage investment. So it takes it out of the taxation field and says, this type of equipment is not taxable for property tax purposes in the state of Kansas if invested after 2006. So it removes state, local, and other types of local, yeah.
So, I'm sorry, Madam Chairman, with all due respect, I didn't ask about 2006. I remember 2006, the machinery and equipment exemption, which was statewide. But this is similar to that in the fact that local units of government would not be the ones that would have a say in a property tax exemption. It would be state mandated, correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding, that this moves from the permanent exemption R223 and then shifts to a 10-year, which would have the same effect for this specific type of equipment.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
And the same effect because the battery life on these are not more than 10 years.
I think it's technology dependent, but that's arguable, yes.
Senator Schallenberger.
So I think what we're doing is see if I understand this. There also is an exemption for generation, windmills, solar fields, and now battery. And this would include them, that the state has said if you put a windmill up, you get a 10-year tax exemption. But you negotiate with the county for some kind of donor. Yeah, that's what I call it. Somebody said that wasn't right. Am I right about that? So and then we're trying to bridge the gap. Which is this the 10-year or is this the machinery equipment? Is that what this bill is trying to do?
That's my my piece of the bill. As far as the renewables, I'm in the grain and ethanol space. I'd let the renewable guys talk to the purpose and intent of the bill, but outside of that.
And you have, excuse me, Madam Chair, you have some kind of energy storage in your facility?
So that technology exists, is employed in other states, and it's coming online. My folks are looking at it for various reasons that we talked about, but nobody has made that investment yet today. This is prospective, but they are looking at it today for investment in the near future. So, but again, the dollars have to make sense, or these things don't even come to the state. And then a big part of that is overhead, which is the taxation.
And as you're looking at it, then you would like for it to be the machinery and equipment. Of course, I would think. You're thinking this is an investment in our business, machinery and equipment, be exempt forever.
And twofold, Senator. I mean, it's not just the cost of the overhead piece, which is you're moving from 10-year to, I don't know if this thing pencils out in 10 years. That's a very big investment. Most of these are multi-decade investments when you put the pencil to paper. But also, and I've shared this a little bit already, is that we are now, if under the passage of this bill, if it were to pass, identifying and taking out one piece of commercial industrial machinery equipment and saying, but you don't get this treatment. And my concern is that what else we're going to look at and pull off in the future. It's the policy of the state of Kansas since 2006 to encourage investment for large industry. And this is on all fours of the type of equipment that we would, and looking to invest in for the process, right? It benefits the process by lowering the carbon intensity or lowering the energy rates that are used to produce ethanol, to store and treat grain. And we are saying if this were to pass, that we're no longer going to identify this piece of machinery and equipment for that property tax exemption, which is a wholehearted pivot from the purpose and intent of the 2006 statute.
Okay, I got you. So if you were to build, so let's say at your facility, you were to build or put in a solar field or a windmill, would you consider that machinery equipment and anticipate that you would get the total forever exemption?
So, yeah, that goes right into the definition of a generation facility.
I think there's a little confusion. Machinery, and well, go ahead, answer.
That's a really part of the wonky part of the discussion I'm having with the renewable folks is, what is I'm not an energy guy. I'm ethanol and grain. So, what was the intent and purpose of the past legislation? How do you define a generation facility, which, if we were to monkey with that definition, has a lot of potentialities that are way beyond the scope of this bill. But you're exactly right, that's the definition that we're looking at, is if you were to be a generator, an energy generator, under the definition, how would that affect the play out of this bill? So I think our purpose would say behind the meter. If you are storing behind the meter, then it would be machinery and equipment versus, but that again, I don't want to frustrate the intent of this bill, and why I haven't had that conversation with the other proponents of the bills.
So, and Amelia has an answer to Amelia, thank you.
Madam Chair, in response to the senator's question, renewable energy resources like windmills, solar, geothermal, those exemptions when they originally went into statute were what were kind of considered lifetime exemptions. Several years ago, there was an amendment to that statute that new renewable energy resources would receive a 10-year exemption. At the time that 10-year exemption went into place, those properties were excluded from the CIME exemption, similar to what's happening here.
And those went in 2016 and will come on the books in 2026, some of them. So any other questions for Randy? Thank you, Amelia. Seeing none, thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Next conferee is Josh Spotty. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am Joshua Swati here on behalf of the Advanced Power Alliance, which is the association of the developers and manufacturers and engineers and financiers of the advanced energy economy in the state of Kansas and also in the Midwest. It was kind of helpful that I could maybe follow Mr. Stuckey's comments this morning just to help kind of walk this committee through why we are here. It is actually not that dissimilar to the technical piece of legislation that was heard before this one. We are trying to provide some clarity, and let me back up a little bit and give you a little bit of history on the overall perspective of taxation in the energy industry. Last year, this legislature passed a piece of legislation that would create parity among all generation types so that they all had a 10-year tax abatement and then would go on the tax rolls, because at the time, wind and solar had 10 years, some natural gas peaking facilities had 6 years, other natural gas facilities had 12 years, and the legislature said it would be much simpler if we just created parity and made it all 10 years so everybody knows the rules of the road. At the time, we did not address energy storage systems because at the time they really were not growing that fast and people didn't think about it. Fast forward to 2025, let me give you a little bit of perspective on what's going on in Texas. In Texas in 2021, there were 220 megawatts of battery storage installed. Now, 4 years later, there are 10,000 megawatts of battery storage installed in the state of Texas. They are on track to install another 7,000 megawatts of battery storage in Texas in the year 2025 alone. There were periods of time in the last month when battery storage in Texas was putting out more power than all of Texas's nuclear reactors, which is in between 4,000 and 5,000 megawatts being put onto the grid from battery storage at the time. You might be asking, why is this going on? Well, very simply, electrons have never been able to be stored before, and so if you can store them, it is very helpful for a number of things. One, grid stability. Two, your overall ratepayers and their access to electrons. And then three, helping to address congestion points on the grid. So I'll put a few things out here this morning. If you do not like transmission, new transmission lines, you will like battery storage facilities, because most new transmission lines are usually built because there are congestion problems on the grid, and the Southwest Power Pool is trying to fix for those. Battery storage units can soak those excess electrons up and help address congestion on the grid. Two, if you do not like new generation, battery storage can help with that as well, because battery storage can take excess electrons from any generation source, whether it's wind or solar, natural gas, coal units, or even nuclear, store those until higher times of need, usually in the middle of the afternoon. The reason that we're here today is because as these began coming into the state of Kansas, both the industry and local units of government started to say, well, how exactly are we going to tax these? And Department of Revenue issued a guidance document in the fall. The Department of Revenue's guidance document said they could be under CIME. They could also not be under CIME, the statewide commercial, industrial, machinery, and equipment property tax exemption for lifetime. And counties said, well, what do you mean it could or it couldn't be? And Department of Revenue said, well, it's not entirely clear. And we as an industry, and I think also local units of government, said, let's try to get it at least clear, abundantly clear, so that everyone knows the rules of the road. And then I fully anticipate, Madam Chair, that your committee and other committees in subsequent years we'll continue having this conversation because I would anticipate that this industry and this aspect of the energy grid will continue to grow and evolve. And you heard part of that in Randy Stuckey's testimony just before mine as we sort of suss out exactly what different types of energy storage exist. But for the purposes of 2083, it was drafted to address large-scale grid energy storage and say, here are the rules of the road. And we all now know them. Counties can move forward. We know how to address these. And we are not going to pursue CIME status because, one, we think that a $400 million facility, and many of the largest ones that would be built will be in that range, should be on the property tax rolls. And it can lower the property taxes of everybody else in the county. And then two, it helps from an industry perspective because right now you would have to build that facility and then go apply for CIME status afterward. And imagine investing $400 million not knowing the tax status of that facility beforehand. And so this clarifies things. It makes it clear and abundantly clear to everyone. The only other thing I would say is some of you might be saying, well, why would we even offer a 10-year whatsoever? And I would say if we left this as a status quo, then the industry would certainly, on a piecemeal basis, probably seek out that CIME status. And we feel, as an industry, it's better to let everybody know up front. You are not going to have a lifetime property tax exemption. You will go on the tax rolls in the counties in which you are. Because we do anticipate that this will be a growing industry where we see the potential of billions of dollars invested over the next 5 to 10 years. And I would also point out there is written testimony from Polly Shaw, who is from Plus Power. Last year, Plus Power was the largest installer of battery energy storage in the United States. They have 2 potential projects here in the state of Kansas, but there are many others looking at the state right now as well. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, committee. Senator Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And 2 things. First, I want to thank Josh because this is something that is playing out currently in Halstead, Kansas. This conversation actually started last year with a battery energy storage system provider out of Texas that wants to come to little bitty Halstead. And so Halstead starts digging into this, and the big question revolves around taxes. How do we tax it? What are they worth? Is it property tax? Is it equipment? How does that play out? Because to your point, in Halstead, it could truly be a game changer, right? You add $5 million a year, for example, in property taxes to a budget that is probably $10 million, and property taxes are cut in half in a small community. Now, there's a separate debate, I think, that should be had as to whether these are safe, whether they make sense in every community based on this, that, or the other, and the whole renewable conversation. But I appreciate that we're trying to offer some just guidance and direction, because I'm like you, I'm afraid if we don't do something like this, because these are portable Connex containers sitting, yes?
Senator, that's great. I was just wondering if you had a question. If we have time, I'd like to work some bills today. That's all.
That's fantastic. So these are Connex containers that have these battery systems in them. And so it does raise that question. Does it make more sense for it to be an actual machinery or equipment, or does it make sense to be property tax? And your argument is this makes more sense to be property tax because of that it doesn't last forever. You can put a finite time. Is that correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 things there. Yes, the argument is even if it made sense that they might in fact be machinery and equipment, from a broader policy perspective, we did not want to see $3 to $5 to $8 billion invested in the state of Kansas, and Kansas residents that are paying property tax saying, wait a minute, that facility is paying nothing in property tax for its entire life, which is why we are pulling this out and putting it into the category of generation devices statutorily so that it does come on the tax rolls. And it does, I'm glad you did bring up sort of what these are like. They have a relatively small footprint. A 300 megawatt facility is usually on around 15 to 18 acres. They are in shipping containers or something akin to shipping containers. From a size perspective and a county property tax perspective, they tend to be looked on very favorably because they don't really require a lot. There's not any truck traffic moving in and out of them. They're on a fairly small footprint. They're on concrete footpads, and so they don't require a lot from the county, but they can be a benefit then from a property tax perspective.
Senator Schallenberger.
Thank you. So if we compare these to the other types of exempt properties, solar or wind, in those cases, I think in solar, for example, there's a lease. The solar company leases the land, but in this case, I'm assuming you're buying the land. So is there any property tax, are you asking for exemption on everything from the beginning for 10 years, or will they still pay a commercial rate on the land and they're not going to get land use value, so they're going to pay on the property, the real estate?
Madam Chair, my understanding is, yes, although they are not required to purchase, I think in most cases they have an option to purchase the property. In a zoned county, they would change the zoning to appropriate use, usually industrial. And yes, they would still pay the property tax on that property. I think this is in question the facility itself.
Senator Klemp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So how I'm understanding this, you have a Connex container. The assets that go inside that is where the expense is. Is that a fair assumption?
Madam Chair, there's a variety of expenses. You have the interconnection into the grid. Sometimes that will require a step up or a separate substation, but these are usually close to substations. And then, yeah, the bulk of your investment is in those battery systems.
So if I may, Madam Chair, so where I feel like I'm going is if the usage is 10 years and you get okay.
If I may, I think I see where this question was. That comment was made earlier. Most of these are anticipated to be around 30 years, but I would also say we would expect them to, it's that interconnection is the value at that point. So there are choke points in the transmission grid, and these are fixing for those choke points. And so that interconnection itself is very valuable. Also, how these will likely be used is you would have racks of battery systems. Some will age at different times than others. And so if one is not performing as well, they would simply change that out. But on balance, you will have if the Southwest Power Pool is anticipating a 300 megawatt storage facility at X point on the transmission grid, for the next 30 years, you will have a 300 megawatt transmission or a storage facility at that site for those 30 years and the value that it has.
That was helpful.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Our next conferee is Paul Snyder. Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Paul Snyder, representing Kansans for Lower Electric Rates. I mainly want to just add our voice and support to this initiative. Please note that I do have an amendment in my testimony, which has been, I believe, agreed to by Josh. If you haven't seen it, I got it from Randy. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page. But as Randy talked about, adding that thermal piece to make sure that we aren't, if moving forward, this doesn't exclude current projects that are underway in Kansas. I also appreciate the testimony of Mr. Stuckey raising some policy considerations for you to consider. I think whichever route you go will be a benefit to these Kansas investments. And I would just note, so Josh is really talking about more utility scale projects that will be sold either directly into the grid or through a utility for someone's benefit. But there's going to be applications of this for individual business and industrial customers that want to put it on their land, behind their meter, to help with a variety of issues. So there are and those will be much, much smaller, that just seek to serve that individual customer, where Josh is talking big, giant, 100 megawatt plus facilities. So happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you,
Good,
Paul.
thank you.
Are there any other proponents? Committee, there is written proponent testimony. Any opponents? Any neutral? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on 2083. I think Senator Owens brought up an excellent point. He has been aware of this issue before many of us, and it's not just about tax, but safety also. I look forward to comments and discussion at a later time. Committee, I'm going to turn your attention to Senate Bill 215. Amelia, will you give us an overview? And Eddie has some handouts for us. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill number 215 relates to the Homestead Property Tax Refund Act and would exclude Social Security payments from household income, and also increase the household income and appraised value thresholds for eligibility of seniors and disabled veterans related to the increased property tax claims. Specifically, the bill would amend 794508A for purposes of eligibility requirements to exclude all payments under the Federal Social Security Act from the definition of household income. It would also increase the claimant's upper limit household income threshold to $80,000. It would continue the cost of living adjustments for that upper limit of household income. It would increase the upper limit of appraised value for the homestead for the base year to $595,000. And it would add an annual adjustment to that upper limit appraised value threshold for base years commencing after 2025. And I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, committee. So I just wanted to open this up for discussion. I would like to work it today, but I think there's going to be more questions than answers. So we will pick it up again tomorrow. But I wanted you to have this fiscal information. I do know we're waiting on the Kansas adjusted gross income fiscal note also, and I think that might help clear things up in the bill if we could have that information also. Is there anything else that the committee would need tomorrow to work this legislation, Senate Bill 215? Okay. And that's, if you think of something, you can email Eddie or myself, whomever. But we do want to make sure that we have all the data before us before we try amending this bill. Eddie, would you like to walk through the fiscal note?
Yeah, so these are requests that the committee had made in meetings on February 25th and 26th. On the 25th, I'm going to do them in reverse order. Number 2 first. The first one is you might remember one of the conferees specifically spoke to a possible amendment related to specifying certain veterans benefits to be excluded from this that are kind of conceptually related to veterans benefits that are already excluded from it, but extending that to that. And so the fiscal note, the second line that's about $500,000 per year addition to the fiscal note is that amendment. The first line extends the changes to this, I believe conceptually, to both the Homestead program and the Safe Senior program. The bill as written is focused on the kind of tax freeze style program the state has, and the first line updates the Homestead and Safe Senior programs also to not include Social Security and to increase the home value. It doesn't extend the income thresholds to those programs. Each of the 3 programs have kind of separate and distinct income provisions as it relates to current law. And so separate and distinct income provisions would continue on, but this would continue the practice of having uniform items as it relates to the income side of this. And then the third one is a number of various iterations to the changes proposed specifically by this bill. And so the iterations relate to the valuation amount. I believe in the bill as written, it is $595,000. It is two different versions, a $450,000 and a $500,000. And then it uses three different base years as kind of the starting point for each of those changes. And so the key would be that those, under this version, we would need to clarify the base year by which the changes to that valuation limit take effect. As you can see, the first two there have a base year of 2021 with 450 and 500. So that's basically the bill as is, but just changing that 595 to those two. During the hearing, there was discussion about do we actually intend for this to reach back to 2021 as the base year, because that is in some ways what is driving the high near-term cost of this. And so if you used a base year of 2024 or a base year of 2025 at those levels, those numbers are provided as well.
Committee, any questions for Eddie? So Eddie, on that last chart, it is the 595K household. Would that be correct? On the...
Do you mean it is the 80,000 household income? Because
no, the 80,000 household income, but all of them, it is also the valuation of the home is 595K.
No, on the first line, the valuation of the home is the very first number on each line. So on the first line, the valuation is 450 with the base year is 2021.
Okay,
I follow. Second line is 500.
Okay. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So again, on that very third, the base, it says base year 2024, the very top line, it doesn't have a value. Is that based off of the 595?
I'm sorry, yeah, I misunderstood the chair's question. That is for the bill as is, but only clarifying that the base year to be 2024.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? I think this will be helpful tomorrow working the legislation. I don't, unless you want to start to, Senator Clemp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to layer on to Senator Peck. On the left column on the last chart, it talks about a base of 450 or 500. What's the difference? I understand that it's 50,000 different, but what does that mean? Value of a home?
Eddie?
Yeah, that's the home value eligibility, the home value threshold for eligibility. I believe under current law, it's $350,000. And one of the changes in the bill as written is to increase that 350 to 595. These versions are, what if instead of 595, you increased it to 450 or 500?
And I'm interpreting the fiscal note to the right is much different than what we're seeing in the way it currently sits. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, committee, so I plan to work 215 tomorrow, 259, 73. We'll bring up 25 again for discussion. I don't know if we'll be able to do anything on it or not. And we're going to work bills tomorrow. I don't think we have any scheduled hearings. Okay. So are there any questions? Committee, we will meet Monday. I don't know if you saw the email. We will have a hearing on the House Bill 2396 and HCR 5011. Disappointingly, we finished our property tax work early. The House is just getting theirs to us, so we will take a look at it on Monday. I do want you to look at those over the weekend because I am planning on working those Monday. I know that's very rare, but we need to move on this. Tuesday's the last day in order for committees to meet without special permission. So any questions, committee, on the schedule or what we have going forward? Senator Starnes.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just again, what bills tomorrow?
So 259, 215, 73, And then if time permits, we might get to some others, but those definitely. Senator Clem.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On Monday, which ones are you wanting to work?
We're having hearings
working.
on Monday on 2396 and 5011. There are topics that this committee's seen before. So if the committee's not comfortable working them Monday, I will hold off till Tuesday. But I was hoping that with the forewarning that you might be comfortable doing that. Senator Schallenberger. So yes, they were read in yesterday and they were assigned to this committee. So we did send an email last night to let everybody know so that testimony and everything, we want to, we're short on time, that's all there is to it. So we're trying to get as much done as possible without having to have extra meetings. Any other questions or comments?